We'll call this meeting to order. Sorry, I'm still out of breath from running up the stairs. Representative Woodard, Representative Rajas, and I have been in appropriations, and we just got done. And Shirley too. So, but you got here sooner than I did. Anyway, sorry, I'm still a little bit out of breath. Okay. First thing we have on the agenda, we do have some minutes to approve. When we do bill introductions, we do have to do minutes, which is a little bit unusual for this committee. And so what would the committee like to do about minutes? Yeah, Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move the adoption of the minutes from February 1st and 7th.
Do I have a second? Representative Wassinger seconds. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes for February 1st and 7th, say aye. Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you. Okay, and now we will have the pleasure of hearing from Jim. Sorry, you're going to have to tell me how to pronounce your last name. Jeanette, from the technical colleges. We are looking forward to hearing about all the great things you all are doing. So please go ahead. If it's okay, what we've been doing is when someone's presenting, if a question comes up, we just go ahead and have a dialogue while you're presenting. Okay, so great, welcome, and please go ahead.
I'm Jim Jeanette. I'm president of Manhattan Area Technical College, and I represent the Kansas Technical Colleges this year with the legislature. Thank you for letting me be here. I'm not going to read you the testimony, you have it, but I'd like to draw your attention to a few key things. On page 2, you'll see a summary of what I call primary revenues to the sectors of higher education, whether it's revenue from tuition and fees, state appropriations, or for those entities that have taxing authority. And you'll see there that the technical colleges are pretty severely under-resourced. We get less than $50 million a year combined. Our only sources of revenue, primary revenue, are tuition and fees and state appropriations. None of the technical colleges were granted taxing authority when they were transitioned away from the VOTEX with the school districts they were part of 15 years ago. The bottom of that page, you'll see the average cost per student based on those primary revenue numbers. And you'll see that we're pretty efficient, less than $7,000 in cost per student. So all of the tech colleges are really good at taking $1 and making it go for about $3.50. It's in our genes. On page 3, you'll see a comparison of results. Some key things, educational, what I'd call education performance indicators by sector. And all of the sectors in Kansas do pretty well, but the tech colleges stand out in a few areas. Notice our graduation rate at 61%. Number of graduates employed in Kansas after 5 years, 61%. Our students owe less money in student loans. 98% of our students come from Kansas. They stay in Kansas. And the 5-year enrollment trend for public higher ed, the only sector that's grown, have been the technical colleges. So we've got a pretty good track record. It's been of pretty good duration. Yes, sir.
Representative Riley.
Hate to interrupt your discussion, but while you're on money here, and I hear this coming, so maybe this is a Shirley question. So would that become a bill or something that would go through the legislature, making these tech colleges a property tax? I know the word it's missing me right now, but being able to draw property tax. Right. Okay, but that would have to come back through the legislature at a future time. Okay, so then my question to you is, what is the average? You know, you have all kinds of programs from, CNAs to everything that you have, but what is the looking at these numbers, what is the average amount of time that a student is transitioning through your program before they go to work?
Very good question, and it will vary. Let's talk healthcare to start with. So CNA, they get that done in a few weeks. If they want to be a nurse, if they want to be a registered nurse, the associate degree level, with the prerequisites that are required, that's at least 2.5 years of college. But through us, community colleges have similar programs. I have one of only 2 electric lineman training programs in the state. President Calvert has the other one at Pratt. Ours is a 1-year certificate program. His is a degree program. In 1 year, 12 months of training, my students in lineman training are going out and their first jobs, they're getting paid $70,000 to $85,000 with 1 year of college. It's a certificate. What we saw before the pandemic started, but it's certainly been accelerated with the pandemic, is the push for those certificates, those credentials, industry recognized credentials, more than degrees. So we've seen kind of a slow up in people wanting to get the associate degree unless it's required in their program. Instead, they're looking at that short-term or long-term certificate, but it still puts them in the workforce sooner and it's less expensive. I'd say for us on average, 15 months.
Okay, thank you for answering.
So again, on performance, you'll see that we've done well, and we do a lot to train the workforce in Kansas. There are only 7 tech colleges in the state, but we're located in pretty strategic locations. One of the key things we did get from the legislature last session was maintenance of effort funds toward the end of the session. And on pages 5 and following, you'll just see a summary of how we've used those funds. Capital outlay is one of our most significant issues. The overall amount of funding for capital outlay for the qualifying 2-year colleges really hasn't changed since 1977, which is when Star Wars came out. Yeah, the best Star Wars. In my particular institution, I get about $125,000 a year for capital outlay, and I have to match it at 50%. That doesn't cut it. I have the smallest facility footprint of any tech college in the state. I have less than 100,000 square feet of space. And yet the demand on us grows all the time. So capital outlay is also a significant part of what we're seeking with support, whether it's more maintenance of effort funds if that becomes available. We're also trying to get a tax credit bill that the House approved last session through the Senate committee. The House approved it 119-4. And that bill would give the tech colleges the ability to get donations for capital outlay and use tax credits. That allows us to build up excitement in our communities as well as a donor base. If you go to page 8, I want to just show a comparison of the revenue with the community colleges. I want to relate it to the state funding formula. I'm not picking on the community colleges or the universities. I'm showing our status. The state funding formula says that the community colleges will get 1/3 of their funding from students, tuition and fee revenues, 1/3 from taxes, 1/3 state appropriations. The tech colleges, since we don't have taxing authority, the funding formula says we'll get 2/3 in state appropriations and 1/3 from students. In neither case is it accurate. So in my particular case, the average is even skewed more. At Manhattan Tech, I get about 30% of my funding from the state. My students are paying 70%. The only control the tech colleges have on revenue is raising tuition and fees. And most of us do raise them almost every year because we have no other choice. Despite that, we keep this performance going. Even through the pandemic, we were growing. On the last 2 pages, you have some ideas from the tech colleges on how to address some of these issues. They're just options for your consideration. You've probably heard similar ones from the community colleges: to fully fund the state funding formula, to provide more funds for capital outlay, and to fix the gap. We support all of those things because, frankly, we need some resources. For most of our institutions, the only way we can start a new program is to kill an existing one, and most of us don't have any weak sisters anymore. In my particular case, again, I'm being asked to put in training for people to be electricians and plumbing because of all the development in Manhattan and on Highway 24. That means I have to probably get rid of something else to afford to do that. And when it comes to facilities, very few of us are overbuilt, and what we're looking for in facilities is functionality. It's a Butler building because we're going to spill oil, paint, knock a hole in the ground, drill something. We need functional space. And with that, I'd be glad to stand for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. That was really very factual and interesting. I appreciate that. I think we do have questions. We'll begin with Representative Riley, and then we have others.
It's another financial question. So of the tuition money, how much of that is provided by grants or other kinds of financial aid?
It'll vary by institution, but the rough average would be about 65%.
Are you getting any money from, I know this happens in Wichita, the electricians union, the dip plumbers union, that's not pipe fitters union. They support their own education. So you probably have competition to them, and so therefore you're not receiving any grants or help from them.
Again, it'll vary by institution. In my particular case, I get help from a lot of building contractors because of our construction trades program. We have various nursing scholarships that come from either hospitals or like Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's all part of the mix, but it's all part of that 65% average.
Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering how much money is unencumbered. How much do you have of unencumbered cash? If I could say it correctly the first time, I didn't have to repeat it.
Good question. I happen to have a pretty good rough estimate. It's based on the FY20 audits. Combined, the technical colleges have probably about 16 million in unencumbered cash.
16 or 60?
16.
On page 3, this doesn't sound like the graduation rates that we've been given by some other schools. But technical colleges have a graduation rate of 61%, and not the other schools do not. Is that what I'm?
This is data, the latest data from the U.S. Department of Education's college scorecard, and it's an average of all of us combined.
And that's just for Kansas, or is that the United States?
Well, the college scorecard is national, but this is just Kansas data from that scorecard.
Oh, but this is Kansas data.
Yes. This college scorecard was just updated in the last 2 weeks. That's where I pulled it.
Very interesting. Thank you, sir.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, President, for being here. I know pre-pandemic we heard enrollment numbers, enrollment trends of universities, community colleges, career and tech programs, and you are all bursting at the seams, really. I think that continues to be the case. So back to page 9, looking at the full funding for the formula for technical colleges, has there been a year, and if so, when was the last year that technical colleges were fully funded?
Never.
Never. Thank you. And I'm certainly interested in number 3, looking at the gap. If there was advice that you would have for the committee on how we could kind of stop this more volatile nature of the gap funding, with some folks being underfunded, overfunded. Obviously, that's right now pandemic related, but how we can stop some of the more unpredictable shifts from year to year.
I think, and I've talked with my colleagues just a day or two ago on this, we think one fair approach would be to make sure that any new funding for tiered and non-tiered this year only goes to those institutions that have a gap. But moving forward is probably to take out the current provisos that are hold harmless and use a 3 or 4 year process with rolling averages and start moving the gap, addressing the gap, but make it as limited pain as possible. Because I do believe all of us are going to see increased enrollment as the pandemic eases. Again, I'll give you an example from my institution, if I may. 7 years ago when I got there, we only had 12 Manhattan high school students taking early college with us. Now I have over 400 a semester, and they want that to double, and that's both gen ed and tech ed. Most of our other tech colleges are seeing similar issues. How do we address that? Again, in my particular case, looking at K-Board data, over 75% of my graduates stay in my service area. So the tech colleges are a great way to keep the brain drain from going on keeping good people around, and they become not just employees, but taxpayers and consumers.
Follow up if I may. To clarify, so you would support keeping the funding levels where they are for 2022 to 2023, and then looking at how we can address those more equitably or more predictably.
But again, if new funding is provided for tiered, non-tiered for FY23, just have it go to those with the gap.
Thank you, Madam.
Confirm, isn't that what we do anyway? I mean, the new funding goes to the gap. Haven't we said that in the past? Or are you suggesting something different that I'm not understanding?
My understanding is it hasn't been quite as directed to only those with the gap in the past. You have to look at both the tiered and non-tiered and make it work. And I think that's where the K-Board staff could make that happen if they were so directed. That hold harmless proviso restricts how quickly those gaps can be addressed.
For fiscal year 2022 and 23, which is what we'll be doing recommendations, do you have an opinion about the proviso for these recommendations right now?
With my members, the majority of them would say we're okay leaving the provisos one more year as long as the new funding goes only to those institutions with a gap. But moving forward, the provisos should be removed.
Thank you. Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe for the committee, you could discuss exactly what does the gap mean? And is it truly a gap or is it a perceived gap?
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to see if Elaine Frisbee would address that from the regions.
Will you introduce yourself, Elaine?
Yep. Thank you. I'm Elaine Frisbee, Vice President for Finance and Administration with the Board of Regents. Representative Wassinger's question on the gap. So in 2011, Senate Bill 143 was enacted, which told the Board of Regents create a formula for funding the technical and gen ed courses at the two-year colleges. Working with the colleges at the time, a cost model for calculating the state share of the cost to deliver instruction was developed. The difficulty the colleges have had is that funding formula has never been fully funded. So we've always had a shortfall in state funding in financing the state's calculated share for delivering courses. So there are other expenses at the colleges that the cost model does not address. This is intended to get at the cost of instruction.
I just, if you don't mind, just maybe ask a clarifying question that I think will be helpful. When that bill passed and they did a cost model, as you called it, were those specific amounts that had to be put in for certain tiered and non-tiered classes? It was a specific amount. And then my question is the next year, because if I'm understanding all the years since, what we have said or what is part of the cost model is that everyone gets at least what they got the year before.
Yes, so there are many aspects to how this works, and it gets a little complicated.
Yeah, and I want my committee to understand. I mean, I really am hoping that we have a grasp of this. So if there's a way you can just take a short period of time but try to help us out, that would be great.
Give it my best shot. So the cost model was developed in concert with our office and the colleges. And there was agreement that the cost of delivering a class like welding is going to cost more to the college than it is to deliver a history class. And so the cost model attempts to refine the costs, the estimated expenditures needed for the college to cover those expenses. So there's two parts to the cost model. What expenses should the state be financing? And then how are those expenses financed? So there's the cost part of it, and then there's the revenue share. So on the revenue side of the ledger, then you talk about the property taxes that the community colleges can levy. The state aid is mixed in with that, depending on the student body represented at that college, and then the student tuition. So you have three aspects for the community colleges. For the tech colleges, they only have the two legs, the state aid and the student tuition. I believe we have 25 cost rates for the different classes. So every course is plugged into a different rate, a different tier. And we go through a lengthy process with all the colleges, gathering every student in every two-year college course, and we plug everybody into the model, and then it spits out what the state's share of the state aid for the tiered and the non-tiered courses separately. Then we take a look at, well, what state funding do we have available to pay the state share? And again, there's always been a shortfall, and that is part of the gap. Now, according to the cost model, this is also calculated, it's calculated to student level in each class, and then of course it's aggregated for each of the public colleges. In some cases, we have colleges who, according to the cost model, would be considered to be receiving more than the cost model would predict that they should. We have other colleges, much of the technical colleges would apply here, but also some of the community colleges, where they have had a gap in their own funding. So another layer of complication, there have been provisos placed on the appropriations in the appropriation bill that then dictate how we at the board office, the Board of Regents, and the Tech Ed Authority can distribute the allocation. So we get one appropriation for tiered, one appropriation for non-tiered, and then it is the Tech Ed Authority and the Board of Regents' responsibility to allocate that across the system. And so we must do that in accordance with the proviso, which has placed some limitations on how those funds can be allocated. Hope that helps. Okay.
It's helpful. I think we all need to hear it several times. So I'm going to go ahead and call on Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last year there was a request to increase funding by $8 million, I think, and that was for Senate Bill 155, correct? And I thought at the time that we were fully funding it with that increase. Is that not correct, or was there still more in order to fully fund it?
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
So that's a whole other aspect of we use the cost model to estimate the state's costs for delivering the SB 155 courses. In that case, the state finances 100% of the state share of those classes. And we have had a few times when the state has underfunded the expenses for that program, and we've had to prorate the colleges on what they were reimbursed. But more recently, the legislature has ramped up funding, and we do anticipate next year the enrollment is going to bounce back after the pandemic. And so we are seeking another $2.5 million for that program to keep up with enrollment.
Thank you. Representative Riley, then Representative Rajas.
So following up on your question of Model A, Model B, Model C. So is this documented someplace that we could take a look at how you figure this out? It sounds like pretty random stuff that you're doing here. And
No.
Can anybody follow through and see what you're doing? So if one of the tech colleges came in and said, well, show us how we got our money, would you be able to do it? If one of the community colleges came in and said, show us how you came up with our funding, you'd be able to do it. So I'd like to see something like that.
Madam Chair, if I may, yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. We would be able to, any college would be able to log into our system and see their data at any moment. But the formula itself, absolutely. We go over this with the Tech Ed Authority and the Board of Regents every year.
Okay, Representative Rajas.
Thank you. This is for Jim. Thank you, Elaine. See ya. All right. You talked about a couple of different things, and one of those, is recentering. It's now been brought up here. So what does that do for your institutions? All of them.
So in a typical gap year, most of our institutions have been underwater. We have not been paid enough. The current gap calculation from KBOR has the pandemic anomaly, is what we all call it, because it's changed a lot of things. Prior to that, Almost all of my institutions, all of the tech colleges were underpaid on both tiered and non-tiered. Again, I'll go to my case. My budget is about $7 million a year total. Before the pandemic hit, the typical gap calculation showed they owed me another $400,000 to $500,000 that I did not get. On a $7 million budget, that's significant. Wichita Tech is owed probably close to $5 million in tiered and non-tiered combined that they have not been paid because funding is not kept up, plus the limitation of the provisos.
So you're in favor of recentering?
Yes. We also realize that's, typically it would be done on like a rolling average as far as figuring. So some years we're going to get hurt. We know that. But it needs to be a fair system. That's all we're asking for.
Madam Chair, is that all right to keep going?
Yes, please.
I hear you're continuing to work with Manhattan High and probably some other area schools and other technical schools are, and not to put you on the spot, but I mean, is it working with the regents? Should you go back under the Board of Education since you're doing so much with K-12? I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room. I think it should be asked.
It's a very fair question. One of the things that all of the tech colleges have had to fight for the last 10 to 12 years is the perception in our communities, oh yeah, you're the VOTEC. And I'm not knocking VOTECs, but the perception years ago with VOTEC is a person went there because they weren't smart enough to go to college. That's not true. As I told the new K-State president this morning, when he asked me a dangerous question, I am a public accredited technical college. My accreditation is the Higher Learning Commission, the same as KU, K-State, Johnson County, you name it. And the skill level that we have to train our students for to go to work is at a very high level. When we have people visit our campuses and see what we're doing, they're blown away because, oh yeah, you're not just teaching somebody to change oil or take a temperature. No. We are the flip side of the coin to what the universities do. They produce knowledge-based economic development. We're the skills side. We have to provide that workforce. So I think it would be a mistake to put us under K-12 because of that college and accreditation issue.
And I've been an advocate for helping get more capital outlay dollars. In the Commerce Committee and in appropriations today, we were talking about some of the commerce money going to higher education. A lot of it focused on the big three, nothing wrong with the other three and the rest of the institutions. Is there a role in some of that for technical colleges and probably not specifically capital outlay, but have you looked, we're all kind of learning what exactly that means, or is that something that, as we work on the budgets outside this committee, possibly I know it's kind of two piles of money, but still to try to get you where you need to be based on the pandemic as you kind of ramp back up again?
Good question. Capital outlay is not just buildings, it's also equipment. And for many of our institutions and their programs, it's keeping up with the level of equipment that meets employer expectations. Again, for many of us, area employers do donate to us. They'll give us old equipment and resources. It's never enough, but it helps to address the gap. The maintenance of effort funds the legislature approved last session were targeted only for the purchase, delivery, and installation of equipment. We can't use it for facilities. And for many of us, we need help either upgrading a facility or adding a new Butler building, as well as equipment. So the thing we would ask on capital outlay is to give it, don't restrict it to just equipment, but help it where we can do some things with our buildings.
What about Spark? I mean, are there proposals, I assume,
Yes.
maybe for this?
6 of the 7 tech colleges worked together and submitted a proposal to Spark last week, specifically addressing advanced manufacturing and IT. So we're hopeful that would come through.
Buildings, including it. You know what the dollar amount was, just off the chance?
Right around 70 million.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm glad you got your application in. I think they're flying into the SMART committee, but I hope they'll find it to be approved for you all. I think if I remember, the maintenance of effort money could not be used for buildings. So yeah, that was a stipulation. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think based on this discussion, we'll probably see, hopefully, recommendations when we do budget recommendations on how to approach the gap. I think it's important to look at too the impact for residency for out of state or out of county. Does that apply to technical colleges in the way that it does to community colleges?
It's a very small impact and it's different. If I can refer to the request Representative Riley had to higher ed, to that report, and if you look at that, for the tech colleges, we had one institution with 1.2% of their enrollment from out of state, one with 2.1, one with 3.4. I mean, overall, it's less than 1% of our enrollment. With two of those institutions and their location, their regional economy goes over the state line. And so, for instance, with Ben at Northwest Tech at Goodland, the Eastern Colorado economy affects Northwest Kansas. He's getting some of those Colorado students to come get training, but they're feeding his economy as well, and many of them do stay in his area. So I think in case of the tech colleges with out-of-state students, it's really tied more to a regional economy and shouldn't be looked at as an in-state, out-of-state. Same thing with Sherry at Wichita Tech. Much of hers is related to the aerospace industry.
Does that apply to students from out of county in the same way that it does with community colleges?
Since we don't have taxing authority, we don't have districts. So all students are in district for us. So it doesn't matter what county.
So no. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, kind of answered this to a degree, but just I think repeating is never going to hurt, or maybe said a different way. Your number one is fully fund the state formula for technical colleges. I'm not sure how that differs than fix the gap, which is number three. But my question is that 2/3 state, 1/3 tuition for the technical colleges, but it's really way off. And you said 30%. So how did that happen? How does that happen? And what does that have to do with your number one?
Okay. If you look on page 8 at that pie chart, my particular institution, it's a 70-30 split. That's not true overall. Right now, for the tech colleges, and this is based off of FY20 revenues, tuition and fees make up around 54% of our revenues. And state funding is at 45%. So if that went to 2/3, based on that total revenue, and that's what the calculation is below, is based off those revenues. If 2/3 of that came from the state, we could hold tuition fee costs. We'd have more funds that we need, theoretically. But that's what we're looking at, is how do we've never had the 2/3 funding. The appropriations have never been there. That makes sense?
So does that have to do with what you charge for tuition and fees? I mean, of course, that's going to affect the percentages.
Right. So again, because of the gap, because of limited funding for capital outlay from the state, and not enough funding for the formula, those two things combined have meant that we've had to raise tuition and fees to try to keep up with our costs. We don't have that other leg of the stool.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Riley.
Well, that's exactly where my question was going then. I know that there's been a lot of pressure by the administration to hold tuition costs, but your programs are all so directly related to industry that you could really raise your tuition costs 20%. And if these students in 15 months, 18 months, they know that they've got a job that's a $75,000 job, or welding $50,000, $60,000 job, the cost of that tuition, if I was doing a comparison to coming out as a high school student and know that I'm going to spend 4 or 5 years at a 4-year university and maybe get a job that would maybe pay $50,000, or go to school for 18 months, and making that kind of income, my short-term thought would be, I don't care what that tuition is, I'm going to pay it. So
There's a degree of, whoa. There's a degree of truth to what you say, but there's a problem. The students getting federal financial aid, depending on the cost of the program, there's a max cost federal aid will fund. So, for instance, but for some of our students, that's going to force them to take more loans. That's where we get the rub is some of our programs get to the point where federal financial aid will not cover the cost. And that puts that student in a more precarious spot, and they may decide not to come on to us.
goes back to the original thing. I mean, if I know that coming out, I have a $50,000 job in 18 months or 75,000. I know I don't like thinking of students having more than 25% of their first year's income in a loan. But if I've got a certain amount of grants, I could play the role of getting an extra.
That's where the Promise Act does make a difference for us. That does help with many of those scenarios. So that's been a valuable tool that we do appreciate coming from the legislature. 3 years ago, Georgetown University did the first national analysis of the return on investment of higher education across the country. And one of their metrics was called net present value over 40 years. What's the value of your education for your career earning time of 40 years? The top 5 public colleges and universities in Kansas for that 40-year earnings. You ready? Number 1, Washburn Tech. Number 2, KU. Number 3, K-State. Number 4, Manhattan Tech. Number 5, North Central Kansas Tech. 3 of the top 5 tech colleges. And when I reported on that to the regions, they were all like, what? We would appreciate any more support we can get, always do. We're going to keep doing the best we can with what we have. What I'm trying to show in the testimony is we've done very well. We need some help if we want to keep producing at an even higher level.
Thank you. Committee, any more questions? Representative Rajes?
Thank you, Chair. This is probably more for you. There was a list of exhaustive questions that our other colleges did. The tech schools answer all those questions? I was looking for in an email and I didn't see it.
That is a great question. I do not believe we forwarded those on to the tech schools or the other schools, but we could do that. I think those answers would be really helpful for everyone. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We will work on that. Thank you for that suggestion. Representative Amix.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim, just a question. One of the questions that a representative across the way was bringing up in that report was the enrollment drop, anticipated enrollment drop in 2025, I guess is a real deal that's coming, potentially. Where are you guys going to be in 2025?
Well, even through the pandemic, the tech colleges were growing overall. I'm going to answer for my institution because I look at it. If you look at the county population projections for Kansas, there are only 3 counties in Kansas predicted to have double-digit growth for the next 25 years. Johnson County. Anybody know what the other 2 are? Potawatomi and Gary, which are in my territory with Riley. Working with my employers, working with our school districts, we're looking at growth. Even through 2025, their school districts overall are projected to grow. And the demand for more skilled workers, especially with Highway 24's expansion with both commercial and residential, I'm looking to probably come close to doubling my enrollment if I can get some help with resources.
Okay. Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might just be a question for anyone, but do we have a handout with the exact numbers as far as what they're requesting for 2022, 2023, and what the governor is recommending? I didn't see it here in this big handout.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. Would you please, if that was to me, will you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Or just anybody. I don't see the exact numbers that they're requesting, and I just wanted that information as far as the budget request for 2022, 2023
Or the Board of Regents, or I'm sorry, for the technical.
for the technical
Make
colleges.
sure you have that by tomorrow.
Yeah, that would be great. Mhm. Okay. Thank you for asking that. And I'm sorry, I got distracted for a second. I have to go testify in another committee, and so I'm just trying to time everything. I mean, I'm happy to leave the committee in my vice chair's capable hands, but I just wanted to make sure that all was well. So sorry that I got distracted for just a minute, committee. Representative Amix.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim, just so that I understand this again, to fully fund our formula that would take you to 2/3, 1/3, that's the $10 million figure, correct?
In addition to what is the governor proposed.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. That's what I want to know. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That's helpful. Okay, anyone else, committee? Thank you so much. Now, will you tell us, you're here because there is a council of presidents and you're the president of the presidents, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Does it change every?
It rotates. I'm on my third year and last year.
Okay, third and last year. Well, I think your presentation was really informative and I appreciate that. And thank you for coming to the committee. And I think we have something from Shirley.
You all received an email from me just a few minutes ago with the cost model formula, the description of how it's funded, and the table for both tiered and non-tiered, the most up to date as far as what is currently overfunded and underfunded.
Thank you, Shirley. It is really a great table and it's very informative and I hope that you all will dig into that and take a look at it. Okay, anything else for the good of the committee? Thank you all so much. We will be back here tomorrow and we're adjourned.